Going live early.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of SEO Fight Club. I'm just saying hello in the YouTube chat. And remember, as always, that if you have questions, if you're on the Zoom meeting or in YouTube, we will be looking at chat. So feel free to ask questions at any time. We'll try to get to them as it's appropriate. Let me pop out this chat window so I can watch it. Today we have a very cool show. I've seen this slide deck. I saw it yesterday, and it's pretty amazing. It is new information, so it's up-to-date information on this topic, which is really cool because a lot of the information that we've been using on this topic is starting to get at that age where we're like, oh, maybe we need to retire this evidence and get something more fresh. And so I'm really happy when I see things come up like this where we take a fresh look at an old topic. Clint, what do you think about today's topic?
I think it's great. I think it's one that it's also repeating, right? So ever since I started SEO, I can remember keyword density and talking about it and keyword stuffing and the effectiveness of it or lack thereof. So it's almost an evergreen thing that we can keep revisiting once a year.
Yeah, exactly. And what tends to get me out in the SEO community is how many people are just kind of like just very opposed to it. Like it's deeply ingrained in who they are as an SEO to say, keyword stuffing, keyword density, any of that type of approach is very bad and will destroy you, and all of those apocalyptic things that they end up saying. And it's okay to have differing opinions, but that's kind of a very extreme viewpoint. The part that usually gets me the most upset is when people refuse to look at the evidence. It's not even about what they think about the evidence. It's that they've made their determination before ever even seeing the evidence. They've already decided. And those are the ones that, I don't think will even reach today, but they're the ones that tend to drive me up the wall the most. Have you encountered those out there?
Oh, absolutely, all the time. I mean, you'll see some of that in the slides, as you know. But when I was telling somebody yesterday, I said I don't think this is going to change anybody's mind because people tend to be polarized around this issue and go with their perceptions rather than data, even when the data changes over time. So, but I felt like it was something that was worth having some good information out there. So for those that are open to looking at it and testing it and looking at it in their own niches, it can help guide them to better results when applied properly. So that was my intentions.
Excellent. So with that, I know we have a lot of slides today, so we'll kind of go quickly through the boilerplate. Carolyn, what's going on with the podcast?
Oh, well, I have two things. One, I actually found a niche that Google says has zero search, and yet you can't sling a dead cat without hitting something about it. So it's either that or I'm sort of torn. I found something interesting in Search Console that, again, it's the show is always about trying to take what we kind of talk about on a high level and pull it down so business owners who are doing their own SEO or just beginning SEOs can make sense of it instead of taking chapter and verse out of analytics or Search Console and beating their SEO up over it. So I'm kind of torn today. So I got to figure this one out.
Nice. And you're well into your second season of the podcast. Is it picking up steam? How's it going overall?
Yeah, picking up new listeners every week apparently. So I think that's good, and got a couple of sponsors. So I'm super happy with the direction and kind of the commitment to try and keep it real. Season 2, so that's kind of the challenge.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm all up to date on the episodes, so now I'm down to waiting for each week. But check that out if you're looking for more SEO content to consume. Clint, what is going on with SEO this week?
Oh, this week we just went over some administrative stuff, some changes that we're making to the website, and then talked a little bit about some of the news that I published. Well, I think it was 3 or 4 articles last week, so kind of a slow news week. But all in all, it was a decent show, and I'm getting better at keeping them shorter, so people seem to like that too.
Very cool. So check out Clint's reboot. So it's a reboot of his old series. And Lee, that brings us to your course. What's going on there?
Yeah, we've this one for a variety of reasons, some of which just me screwing up. This will be the last week that we're taking people on for this. It's kind of a short promotional window, but tested SEO training. It's all the testing that I do that I don't publish goes into what works right now, and sort of a step-by-step of how to do it. It's something that is useful if you're an intermediate or advanced SEO. It's new tools that you can add to your toolbox to make what you're doing right now work better, and just some brand new techniques as well. So if you're interested, hit testedseotraining.com. Look at the information there. You're going to have to apply, which means you have to talk to me. And I'm closing it down Friday. So if you're interested, you've got about 3 days left. So.
Yeah, I took his course last time, and I picked a relatively easy keyword. It's one of those training sessions where everybody does the training on their own website and shares the results they're getting as the course progresses. And so when I did it last time, I picked, a relatively easy keyword with a few authority players I had to beat. And by week 5, I had gotten to page 1 on Bing and actually number 1 on Bing and number 1 on Google. And I'm a little bit astonished by how efficient Lee's technique is. And I'm kind of skeptical that I could do it again with a harder keyword. So I'm taking this course again, and I'm going to do it again with harder keywords. But it's really cool. So and I highly recommend this course if you are a Quora user and you're looking to get to that next level. Like, this is what you're looking for in that specific case. So any Quora users out there, I highly recommend this course. All right, let's move on to the topic.
All right. So this is just a sample from the last couple of weeks. These are the definitive rules on how to use a keyword if you're looking at SEO discussions or the articles that have been written. First thing you need to know is that keyword density is not a thing. That was an article that was written and debated, and it was kind of laughable, but hey. But you got to keep your keyword density low, 2 to 4%, to avoid a penalty. Now, I don't know how those two things coexist. I'm just trying to figure this stuff out. So there's a lot of this conflicting advice out there. The other thing you're told is you need to write naturally, because keyword stuffing will get you penalized. You don't want to overdo it. But you need to make sure to generously use your keyword throughout the variety of different zones there. So little bit hard to figure out where the line is there, but know that if you do overuse your keyword, your page won't get indexed. But if you've overused your keyword, and the page which won't get indexed is stuck low in the SERPs, reducing your keyword frequency will improve your rankings. So that's what I found about how to use a keyword and how often to use it.
Well, that's clear as mud.
Absolutely. And I think that the funny thing in going back and doing some of the research for this particular show is, Clint, you're right. You should be experiencing deja vu because SEO Fight Club episode 001 was on keyword density. So it is a topic that just will not die. So I tried to start with a real simple thing. What is keyword stuffing? Try to figure out where the lines are. Started off with a simple definition. Keyword stuffing, it's a spam technique where keywords are loaded all over the place, here. Now, I didn't really think about before, keyword stuffing to me was, I didn't think about it in terms of backlink anchor text, certainly in the meta and visible content, but this was an interesting definition to me. Is that, for those of you guys that have been around a long time, I don't know if keyword stuffing in the vernacular would include backlink anchor text. What do you think, Ted, Clint?
That's someone at Wikipedia making a weird edit.
That's kind of what I felt, but I was like, well, back in the day when this was penalty fear of God into people, it was more to do with the content, but it's possible. So I said, let's go. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it's never really been tested if backlink anchor text has keyword density like effects. There were occasions, like way back in the day, there was a time when eBay would rank for online auctions without saying online auctions on their webpage. Mm-hmm. And so they did that because everybody linked to eBay saying online auctions. So I can kind of see how, there could be some theories, but I think a lot of those theories are largely untested.
Yeah, so that wasn't helpful. So I just said, I wonder if Google has any information about this, and it turns out they do. So again, we use that phrase loading a web page with keywords. We're not specific about, what constitutes loading versus sprinkling. And they also say that repeating the same words or phrases so often that it sounds unnatural, which is intriguing to me because I didn't know the algorithm had sonic capability. But leaving that one alone, their example, we sell cigar humidors. Our custom cigar humidors are handmade. If you're thinking of buying a custom cigar humidor, please contact our custom cigar humidor specialists at custom.cigar.humidors@example.com. Like, I've seen pages like that.
Yeah, that's every website I've ever seen.
But, it does sound a little choppy, and I can see where from a CRO perspective, which we're not really talking about today, but from a CRO perspective, that might not be the best content. But again, there's no clarity on what constitutes loading. It's a very, very vague term. So I dug a little further. And the most often cited thing came from a video that Matt Cutts did in 2011. It is still cited in discussions that went on in the past week in the various SEO forums. So how much loading is too much? He starts to talking about a little bit about density, but he said, once you start to do it, there's diminishing returns. And I can tell you from testing that is true for keywords and for a lot of other factors. There are diminishing returns as the more you use something. But then he goes on to say, so the first 1 or 2 times you mention a word, that might help. But just because you can say it 7 or 8 times, that doesn't necessarily mean it will help your rankings. I'm like 7 or 8. And that seems to be the genesis for keeping it low and sort of the concept of keeping your keyword density low, 2 to 4%, if you're really pushing it, 4% is a crazy number. So I thought that was interesting again, still nothing clear, but at least we have some numbers here. So now that I know that, 7 or 8 times, if I go beyond that, I might get a little a little dicey. We're looking at a little further. And just very recently, John Mueller said, our systems are built to ignore keyword stuffing. They don't even look at it anymore, according to John Mueller. So there's no penalty that I'm aware of. And what I did is I reached out to SEO Signals Lab and I said, hey, is anybody in the past, year or so, 2021, 2022, gotten a manual action for keyword penalty, keyword stuffing? Nobody. Most people hadn't even heard of it. So maybe it's been this way for a while that keyword stuffing penalty has gone away, but who knows? Any thoughts on that?
Well, they still have it posted. So it's still in the webmaster guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's not something they enforce anymore, then why have the rule? Why have the manual action? I agree. I have not seen it for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
So I do concur with the notion that it seems like Google is no longer enforcing it.
Yeah. So if they're built to ignore, and that's going to be something we'll address here in a little bit, they're built to ignore keyword stuffing. So what exactly does that mean?
That's an interesting way of phrasing it, because ignoring is not penalizing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. There's a difference between those two words.
Yes. And, so again, I still don't have a clear definition of what keyword stuffing is from anywhere. So I decided, let's go look at some data. So I have 40 different keywords that I like to use doing research like this. They look at a lot of different niches. Some of them are high competition, low competition. Some are transactional, some are informational. They cover a lot of different territory, and they do a pretty good job of telling me overall what's going on. I've used these in some analyses for Fight Club and some other things for other training and things like that. Looking at those different niches, I want to define keywords specifically here. So for this keyword, best looking SEO, in every niche, it's the bolded terms. So we're using Quora, the bolded terms. And when we look at the frequency of keywords, there's no double counting. So best looking counts for best looking. It doesn't also count for best and looking. It's one time, not three. Is that something you want to talk about a little bit, Ted?
Just briefly, it probably stands to confuse people more than help them. But when you start looking at variant keyword matches, you have to come up with a strategy on how to count. And a lot of tools don't think it through all the way. So they'll see the word best looking on the page, and they'll look at their list of variants, and they'll see best and best looking on their list of variants. And so they'll search the page for all three, and that one occurrence on page of best looking ends up being, 3 units needed from their SEO tool. I consider that over counting. And what Leah's referring to is a way of counting where you count the longest terms first, remove them from the page before counting the shorter terms. And that way you end up with an occurrence of best looking on page being a single occurrence and not 3. So it's a academic debate about what's most appropriate, but just note that a lot of tools don't go that far into that type of thing, and they tend to overcount keyword variants.
Yeah, and for this purpose, I just want people to know that when you see the numbers, we're not puffing them up by, counting things multiple times. So you're seeing a low number in the data. The other thing that's helpful when you're looking at this is to look at it based on competitiveness of a keyword. And so as a proxy for competitiveness, we're just going to use them based on CPC. We're going to use that as our proxy. So mesothelioma lawsuit is $424. So that's going to be the most competitive keyword. DUI lawyer Los Angeles is the second most, third most on down the way. And then, down in the few pennies range, we've got some keywords down there. Those are going to be the least competitive. So when you look at the data from least competitive to most competitive, that's done based on CPC. Any questions?
So this competitiveness number you're using, that's just the order that they ranked in based on CPC.
Yeah, it's where they're going to appear in the chart. So mesothelioma lawsuit will always be the one on the far, far right. And, the others that are low competitive will be on the far, far left. It'll make sense when we get to the next slide, hopefully.
Yeah, so that kind of normalizes the difference in the pricing. And so it's just who's first and who's 23rd.
Yeah. Now there are some better metrics for doing that. I have some that I've developed that are a lot better than this, and some of the other there's some interesting information when you look at it that way. But just so that everybody else can take a look at this based on their own situation, we just wanted to keep it simple and use data that everybody has. So we're going to start with page 1. What kind of keyword usage are we getting on page 1? And I'm ignoring the other pages right now, just saying, all right, that rule of 7 or 8 times, or, whatever it happens to be, what constitutes keyword stuffing? Let's just see, what's happening on page 1. What are the model sites that Google is rewarding with the page 1 ranking? What do they look like? And so for each of these, there's 2 pieces. The black part of the bar is the average on page 1 for this niche. And the max on page 1, there is a site on this particular keyword. So let's go to mesothelioma. We know this is mesothelioma. The average keyword usage on page 1 is about 220, but one site that's on page 1 did 280. So when you're looking at this across the niches, you can see there's a lot of variability. It doesn't matter what the competition level is. You've got some low usage and high usage across the board. And the average usage across the 40 for page 1 was 101 times using a keyword.
And the interesting thing I see in this data is that Google's not penalizing the people who use the keyword 200 times or more on page.
No, there's one niche where somebody used it a little over 600 times. You can see that. And that's the part that's just visible on the page. You can count it. If you load the page in your browser and hit find, and you search for those various keywords, you can count them up. So it's an interesting thing. So if we're like, how far is too far for stuffing? Well, we can mention it 1, 2, 3, 600 times on a page, and we're still not ignored or disqualified from page 1. Clint, you have any thoughts on this one?
I do not.
Excellent. No, I think it's pretty interesting when you just see, across the board, there's a lot more variability than I would have thought in the data. And we had somebody in chat saying I thought 7 or 8 was the limit. It doesn't help you anymore. So, when it doesn't help you, then okay. So if we're using our keyword 100, 200 times on a page and it's not helping us, then what else is it that's getting us to page 1 if Google's ignoring it? And that's a problem that we're not going to address today. Now, if we look at the entire SERP, okay, where can you rank in the top 100? What's the most? Who are the bad boys? And you can see there that they're a lot higher. You've got some in the 1100, for these things, a lot in the 500, 400 range, visible on the page, still not disqualifying them from ranking somewhere in the top 100.
So these are the maximum measurements possible in the top 100 rankings. And so each vertical bar is a different keyword niche, with that last one being mesothelioma.
Right. Exactly.
And so this is the what I would probably characterize is the most you should probably do for indexing, maybe like they got indexed at this level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're using in Core, if you're using the max strategy, this would be the one that you would be as your goal.
Well, this is an overall max, so this isn't just your competitors. This is everything.
Yeah, this is everything. So again, it's a lot higher than people think. It's 500 to 1100. Again, the 7 or 8 is not, it's not there. So I'm still not seeing anything that says, okay, how far can we go? Now we're going to look in the HTML, because we know that not all the keywords appear on the page. Some can appear in the code. So I'm going to back up just a little bit. This is the page 1 average for each one of these niches, this little black bar right here. That's the little black bar here. So in the code, this is the total in the code. That's the amount that's visible. The orange part is the part that's not visible on page 1. And then this is the max. So you've got 3 measurements here looking at it. But you can see that there is a lot more usage of the keyword in the code than on the page. In fact, 60% of your keywords appear in the source code and they're not visible on the page. 40% are just visible on the page across all of these niches. Seems to be fairly consistent. And again, the average keywords in the HTML is about 756. So we're still getting pretty high. Questions on this? I mean, again, we're just seeing, overall that there is a lot of usage on page 1. A lot of usage on page 1.
And the numbers go way up when you start looking what's in the HTML, not necessarily what's visible on the page. So you got to view source in many cases to get the full story.
And if we go back, these numbers, just some niches that they're not even the most egregious. I know, Ted, you've done several Fight Club episodes looking at games, and, you're looking at 8,000 times games, just that keyword appears in the HTML, and, they're on page 1. So this is not even the limits of what's possible. This is just for a random sampling of keywords.
Yeah, and what I tend to see in the wild is it tends to be an arms race within the niche. If you are in a niche where people compete on this factor, then you start to see it creep up over time.
Yeah, that is a good point, because I'm looking at some of these things here, like in these little, I would sit there and say that there's probably room in this particular these niches to go ahead and improve your keyword frequency and be more competitive than these guys. I would start the arms race. These sort of little low bars here indications that either there is not a lot of variations or people are just not really competing on that one. So that's the frequency part, but every niche has its own little different word count and keyword density. So we'll just look at keyword density. So here they are on page 1. Remember, we're not, it's 1 to 4%. A lot of times the hard rule was don't go over 2. 4, you're getting crazy levels. The average page 1 density is 5.3% across the niches. Now it varies by niche, but that's the average. And I was actually surprised that it was that low.
Yeah, the thing about keyword density is that when you start to, get above 8% and approaching 12%, you start breaking the rules of grammar. And so it stops being like English at that point. And so when you start to see keyword densities going above 12%, what you tend to find are articles that are authoritative lists. And so the largest keyword density I've ever seen on page one out in the wild for a real keyword was a LinkedIn page that was listing prominent criminal defense attorneys for a specific location. And they had a 60% keyword density on that page that just had, a big long list of criminal defense lawyers. So it's always name, criminal defense lawyer, contact info, name, criminal defense lawyer, so on. And because of that, the keyword density was off the chart. So when I see things spiking, above that 10% line, I start to think those are niches that tend to lend themselves to authoritative lists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the interesting thing, looking at the 10% line, you got about a third of the niches here that have somebody on page one with density above 10%. And then you see the fun one, I don't know what it is, about 28%, something along those lines. There in the middle, somebody had that, and was ranking on page one. So I'd have to go look and see what that page was, but the density certainly didn't preclude them from a good ranking. And then looking at maximum density across the board, it goes a lot higher. So again, no penalty, nothing along those lines. So an interesting when you look at the data is that keyword density tends to correlate much, much better with rankings overall in the top 100, the more competitive the niches get. And there's some reasons why, and again, there's some better ways of looking at competitiveness, which tightens this up even more. But I'll just say in my experience looking at the data and other tested data, the more competitive niches, people are taking advantage of keyword density. They're taking advantage of ranking zones, and they're really doing a good job with it. And that is one of the things that they're using to rank better. So this is not a lock that says this particular piece in and of itself doesn't say that keyword density is a thing. You'd have to test it.
So I want to explain this chart a little bit. So on the y-axis there, he has the correlation coefficients. And when you're talking about an SEO factor, a strong negative correlation coefficient is what you want, because that negative correlation coefficient means the more of that factor you have, the better you tend to rank. So this visual aid is a little counterintuitive if you don't understand the correlation coefficients. So just note that correlation coefficients, the more negative they get, the better they are in terms of factor strength, right. The perceived factor strength. And so on the x-axis here, we have all the niches, and they're ordered from least competitive on the left to most competitive on the right. And we see as you tend to move towards more competition, the factor strength on density tends to get stronger. Is that a good interpretation of it?
That is perfect. That is absolutely perfect. So looking at it, then, if you look at all the frequency data that we've looked at, and you look at all the keyword stuff, the density data that we've looked at. So how does Google treat this stuff? What is it that they're actually doing with all of these words that we're shoving into our content or into our HTML? This is where John Mueller kind of gave it up a couple of years ago. He said, if we can recognize that a page is doing keyword stuffing, we can just ignore the keyword stuff part and focus on the rest. We want to rank those pages for the useful part, not the kind of keyword stuffing bad part. And he's had a number of different comments that he's made over the last 2 years that sort of addressed, if you have a bad portion of the page, we simply ignore that. And that can't be true. So we've run hundreds of keyword density tests, just the different groups, different testers over time. This tends to be fairly typically how they do it. And when we're training new testers, it's the first test we have them run because we know what the results are supposed to look like. Now, one of the things that's interesting is the Ted was the first person that I know that pushed keyword density testing up to the crazy 95% level. And in his test, it always ranked number 1. So what's Google's definition of ignored? If 95% keyword density ranks number 1 and they ignore it, how are we generating this sort order?
Yeah, and one of the reasons we call it the most tested, not only have we like intentionally tested it many times, when you make a mistake in SEO testing, the most common mistake you make is you accidentally test for keyword density instead of the thing you're trying to test. You put a few too many keyword mentions on one of your test cases, and all of a sudden your footer tag test became a keyword density test. Because it is the most common SEO testing mistake, it is by far the most tested concept in all of SEO. And yeah, we in the past, we routinely got consistent sort order on density testing. And as of late, it's a little bit more shaken up because of the title and description variants that Google is dynamically inserting into the mix. And we're seeing those things have an effect on the rankings. And so we have to tune those variables out of our testing now to continue testing density in the same way we used to. So it's gotten harder to test density, but what we've seen even in the messed up density tests where they don't account for the description and title variants is that Google is still not punishing the high density pages. It might shift the order of these things a little bit, adds a little chaos into the sort order, but they still tend to favor high density pages ranking over low density pages.
Exactly. So when you look at all the data, you know that they cannot possibly ignore keyword stuffing and density for several reasons. One, there's no way when you do a keyword density test, if you're using random alpha or lorem ipsum, if they're just ignoring the keyword density part and looking at the useful part of the page, the useful part of the page is just other lorem ipsum or other random alpha. So, they're still ranking for the keyword that they're allegedly ignoring. So there's nothing else Google can use to determine those rankings on something like that. Clearly, they're not ignoring it there. And then if you're looking at it in real content and real SERPs, a single mention of a keyword would make the page as relevant as something that uses the keyword a lot of times. And if there is some sort of threshold that if you use it this many times, you're going to get penalized, or if you have this degree of density, you're going to get penalized, then content writers have to talk about the topic without using the keyword. And that's clearly not what's going on out there. So they're not ignoring it. In fact, I found this little nugget. This was kind of fun. If they were ignoring it, they would never open this door either. Somebody asked John Mueller, what about stuffing title tags and descriptions? And he said, it's not against our webmaster guidelines. It's not something that we say is problematic. You can, I think at most something where you can improve things. And then he goes on in this discussion to talk about how stuffing those particular zones helps Google understand your page better. He talks about, examples where you have red widgets, blue widgets, green widgets. You put all that stuff in your title and meta and stuff like that, it helps Google understand that even better. And there's no limit to that. So if they're ignoring it, but they're utilizing it. They're encouraging it. There's no penalty. There's no limit on this stuff. You know, they're actively utilizing it in their algorithm, and they're just, you know, still a little fear mongering and things out there. Thoughts on that one?
Well, it's not the first time we've seen Google make statements that appear to contradict their other statements or their guidelines. You know, I wonder how much of that is continuing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, you know, is there a reason why Google so frequently contradicts itself?
Yeah, there's, you know, there's a couple of things. Either you can sit there and say that they are trying to mislead the public, or you can say that the algorithm changes around so much that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. You know, I think there's probably some truth in both of those. What about you, Clint? You spend your time writing about Google's conflicting statements.
I think the third option is that they just talk to so many people, and we have the benefit of going back and reading the transcripts and finding these things, right? So
Mhm.
maybe they're not intentionally double speaking. They're just kind of just sort of happens because they just say so much.
Right. That can be. So looking at the data, let's say that using your keyword frequently, it's not penalized by the algorithms. And even Google says it's not penalized by the algorithms. We couldn't find evidence of it, both in data and in testing as well. Certainly not ignored. They say, oh, we just ignore that and look at the other parts of the page. That's not true either. And it is beneficial for rankings. We see that in keyword density testing, some other things, the more used, the better you are. And that's not the only thing. I wouldn't suggest if you're trying to rank for mesothelioma lawsuit, you just go put it on a page 10,000 times and go, ta-da, I'm done. I mean, there's other factors as well that come into play. So it's not the only one. But yeah, keyword density is a powerful ranking factor. We know that from testing and from other data as well. So, and that's one actually that there were several times where Google has said over time that keyword density is not a part of the algorithm. So if it's not in there explicitly, it's in there as an emergent factor based on the data we see in the SERPs and in tests. So going back to those rules, seems like there's one. You do want to use your keyword generously, and don't be afraid. There's not penalties that we found. There's not penalties that we see algorithmically. We haven't seen manual actions on this in quite some time. Don't be afraid of it. Don't handcuff yourself because you're afraid that using your keyword is going to get you into trouble in some form or fashion.
I mean, technically, it still is possible that Google could choose to manually penalize a page.
Yes.
So it's just because we don't see it often doesn't mean it's not possible. So maybe, don't go crazy on your client's business, at least not without their permission. But yeah, in general, I've seen keyword density work for, about the past 20 years. And it's always worked the same way. It's never changed. It's never been, ignored or handled by the algorithm, as people like to say. If it was going to happen by now, it probably would have happened by now. And
you also see some of the rhetoric change. Back 2011 to 2017, in those ranges, there was a lot of discussion of keyword stuffing and those sort of penalties. You see it a lot in, Matt Cutts and some other people in old Google documents. But in the more recent past, you see, oh, we just ignore that. we just ignore that. It's not a part, it's not a thing, it doesn't work, we just ignore it. Has been the more, keyword density is not part of the algorithm, keyword stuffing is ignored. So they're taking a different tact. Either the algorithm has changed or Google has resigned itself to the fact that you can't determine a page's topical relevance without factoring in the number of times it mentions a keyword.
And it's kind of, potentially wordplay too when they make statements like that, because I could totally believe that the people at Google are ignoring the issue. That doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It
Mhm.
just means that they're choosing to ignore this issue. Oh, we ignore that. Okay. That works.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it was kind of fun going back through all of the different changes, looking at the different changes over time, and then just looking at some fresh data and saying, um, page one levels ought to be a safe zone. We're not trying to prove at what level of stuffing, is too far or not far enough or anything like that. We're just saying that the frequencies that we're seeing on page one are a lot higher than what we're seeing in the rhetoric around these topics.
Yeah, it always gets me when I try to help someone with SEO and they're in a keyword space where their competitors are using the keyword, several hundred times on page and ranking well. And they're in this mindset that it's really natural to only use my keyword 8 times on page, and they're just not comfortable competing. And at that point, like, I have to have a conversation with that type of business or SEO and say, well, if you're not going to compete on how you differ to try to get the best rankings, you might as well switch gears into pay-per-click. Because if you're not going to do the SEO, if you're not going to be competitive on your factor measurements, then you're probably just throwing away the money.
Mhm.
And so there comes a point where you have to define what it is you're paying for. If you're paying to have your content rank the best it can, then you're probably going to have to tune that page in some way to be competitive. If you're just trying to buy, eyeballs, if you're just trying to buy impressions or to pay for sales, then maybe pay-per-click is makes more sense to you. But yeah, if you're gonna be in SEO, if you're gonna be an SEO and you're gonna tune pages to be competitive and to rank, it's amazing that people would leave the power tools off the table. Oh, I'm gonna rank this document without using the keywords competitively.
Right.
And I've never seen that work well, except for very high page rank websites like eBay and sites of that caliber. Can you get index? Sure, but can you compete at the top of page one for a high competition keyword without using your keyword? I just haven't seen a good example of that. How about you, Clint? Oh, are you muted?
Sorry, I had to step away for a second. So I missed half of what you were saying.
Oh, the question was, the comment I made was, I've never seen a good example of a website ranking, top of page one for a highly competitive keyword without using their keyword.
I haven't either. And that goes with density and backlinks together. So that,
Mhm.
and on page optimization for that matter, is like, I've never seen one that just, write naturally the high quality content. No one's ever shown me this high quality fantasy content that hasn't been SEO optimized, that is ranking for tough stuff. I mean, it's easy to do stuff for long tail, but tough stuff, I've yet to see it.
Right. And I think that the other one, in terms of frequency, I think, Ted, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in some of your keyword density tests, you were also testing a frequency. And so you had a bunch of sites that had 10% keyword density, but you were varying the word count. And I think one of your pages had 100,000, it was 100,000 words and 10% density, which means it had the keyword 10,000 times. Is that correct?
I forget the levels, but they were into the thousands, and all of them, they would increase, 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, so on. And they were all at 10%, and we had test cases around them that ranged from 1 to 95%. And no matter how many times you use the keyword on page, if the density was 10%, it ranked at 10%.
I was just trying to remember what the highest frequency was that you used on a page, and I knew it would have been one of those 10% examples.
Yeah, I think it was more in the ballpark of 10,000 keyword matches.
Yeah, so 10,000 is, and that didn't incur anything, that page ranked. So
yeah, they all ranked, and they slotted in where their keyword density would have placed them.
So now for questions. There was one that I see here. Do the orange outliers on page 1 rank better than the average? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. There's no guarantee on that one. But again, we weren't trying to prove an exact density or prove an exact frequency, just showing what was there. So sometimes your highest frequency one ranked number 1, sometimes it ranked number 10, sometimes in between. Are there any questions on YouTube?
Yeah, here's one. Please also discuss the most dreaded thing over optimization. Is not more keyword density going to make the content over optimized? And the thing about over optimization is that it's never been proven to exist. So every time somebody says, oh, if you tune your page above 4% keyword density, you're not going to rank well. We can always make pages and rank them beyond that. We can always go to Google and measure keywords in the field, real keywords, competitive keywords, and see people violating those rules. We've seen it as high as 60% on page 1. So, if they're being punished for it, it looks like they're being punished all the way to the top.
Yeah, I think that's a great one, because even here, in trying to look at what constitutes keyword stuffing, there's no definition here. Nobody has stepped out and said keyword stuffing is when you use your keyword this many times or at this percentage of your word count or something along those lines. Over optimization is one of those that is a nice concept, but nobody has defined. And if you define it, like you said, we have found lots and lots of examples that violate the definition. So to date in testing, I've never seen something that constituted over optimization. And looking in live SERPs, I haven't seen any either. So if people have an example of that, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. That's been a challenge that I know, Ted, you've put out there for years.
Yeah, I am always open to see evidence to the contrary. That is always welcome.
So
there's another question here. When you looked at the HTML density, was that from the rendered code? My understanding is your data was pulled using Cora. Yes. And I know for a fact that Cora uses embedded Chrome to get the web pages. So yes. The next question, would the age and authority help the site get away with the hang range of keyword usage? So I think what they're asking is that if you diversify your factors, does that help you get away with more? And it is my belief that yes, the general lessons we've seen come out of testing and working with these factors in the real world is that there seems to be something to factor diversity helping things like this work better. What would you say, Lee?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other part of that question, it sounded like they were looking at, the age of a site. I've used these techniques on brand new sites, and it works just as well. So it's not that you're grandfathered into a stuffing free lifestyle, or a keyword density of X, lifestyle or something along those lines. I've done it with brand new sites, do it all the time. So I don't think that the age has anything to do with it. I think that is just the algorithm. Although, again, as Ted said, with age, you have a lot more tend to have a lot more factors that come into play. So that helps as well.
And we have a request for your keyword list. If you can send that to me after the show, I'll put it in the description.
Sure.
Let's see, another question. Do we know if keyword stuffing penalty ever really existed? There's no evidence that it existed as part of the algorithm. There is still evidence that it existed as a manual action that human beings over at Google would penalize people for. So that evidence is still there. It's still in the webmaster guidelines, in the system, and Google Search Console. There's still documentation for keyword stuffing manual actions. They are a program type that is in the system.
So NARC SEO used to work really, really well for this.
So Simon White says that keyword stuffing is bad. It'll kill your site. I refuse to accept your evidence. And he's being funny, first of all. Second is, it's to a point in the debate where we have shown testing for years. We have testimonial from SEOs who use it as a factor. We have measurement data from the field that tells the story. We have new testing that tells the story. And we have the ultimate proof, which is the things that we prove for ourselves. And if you are coming to the table at this point in the game and saying, no, it doesn't work. All right, well, let's compare evidence, because at this point, your evidence needs to be better than the evidence we have. So let's look at that evidence that you're saying invalidates our whole argument. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying I haven't seen it yet. So I'm open to see it. I'm willing to be wrong. There is evidence that could exist that would change my mind. I just have not seen that evidence yet. But there is like a large community of people that are going to go into this with their mind made up before they see any evidence. They've already decided the verdict before looking at the data. And I just hope that, you can not be one of those people. You should always consider the evidence. There should be some amount of evidence that could change your mind. And if there is no amount of evidence that could ever change your mind, then I have to question the science you're using. What do you think, Clint?
I hope there's more people where there's no amount of evidence that can change your mind, because it makes my job a lot easier.
It does.
Another question just came in. When tuning these pages using Cora, is it best to tune for the practical max? Practical max has kind of gone by the wayside. So if you're still seeing practical maximum, that's probably an old version of Cora. But yeah, generally, you probably meant to say the maximum deficit strategy. So in Cora, you can specify the rules for what type of tuning goals you want to have. And so the maximum is what I use. And you would say, I choose websites number 1, 3, 7, and 12 as my competitors. Use the maximum factor measurement from those competitors to be the tuning goal that I'm trying to reach for my page. And so, yes, I would use that maximum strategy. I think that's the aggressive way to do it if you're planning to only tune this page once. I know other people use different strategies, but those are harder to do. They're typically more about, how can I do the minimum effort, but still get to the goals I want? And that's a much finer balance to try to achieve. So out of the starting gate, use that maximum strategy. Clint, you use a different strategy than the maximum. You use a standard deviation strategy. Is there a reason you do that?
My preferred is like the one that I found that was working well for me when I first started using the software, and you had all those options, and I was like, I'm not sure what any of these mean. So I picked a couple of them, and then the 1.5 standard deviation seemed to work best for me for what I was doing.
Yeah. And so, I'd recommend you experiment with them, find what works best for you. Certainly using the maximum could lead to the case where you do more work than you need to. So just be mindful of that.
I find myself in the weird position here of being the most conservative of the group. I just used page 1 average, as a starting point because I know I can get away with that and still find myself on page 1. So it's not saying it's better than the others, but I'm just not used to being the conservative one in a group of SEOs.
Yeah, that's definitely a minimize your work approach. See where it gets you, and less is more. But keep in mind, in general, my experience of tuning to the page 1 average is a surefire recipe to end up on page 2. But that isn't always bad.
Cool. All right. Let's call it a wrap.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. One last time, if people wanted to learn more about your course, where can they do that?
testedseotraining.com.
All right. So check it out.